Thank you for joining us at Sykes Peak. My name is Sean Van.
I'm Dr. Keith Roach.
Today we're going to be talking about when to go see a counselor or a therapist. When do you need help? What to expect and what that process is like. So continue listening and we will get into the material here in just a moment. Welcome back to Sykes Peak. I am Sean Van.
I'm Dr. Keith Roach.
Today we're going to be talking about the experience of getting into counseling and therapy and what that might be like.
When to go.
Yeah. And you know what drives us to it? What are those experiences going through it? When to leave, when to end things, how to end things. So to get us started, you know, we're gonna start off kind of picking up a bit from our last episode where we were talking about who to go see and the nature of a counselor and therapist, and what are some of the conditions that drive us to realize that we need help, that this isn't something we can take care of on our own.
Have you ever been to counseling?
A few times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Currently.
What did you expect? When you went into counseling.
When I was younger, I think I expected answers, probably more immediate results. And that's, I think, partly being young, you know, everything, you just more impatient right now.
Did you expect them to tell you what to do?
Yeah, that's where answers for me. That's why I was like, why is this happening to me? And I wanted them to tell me when I asked the question, why is this happening to me?
That microwave approach.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, ding, it's done.
Right.
Right.
Well, you've read all the books. You could tell me, right?
Right.
So that I think was my initial thought about it. I did have a good one in high school, and I say counselor, they weren't a professional counselor or anything. They were a good mentor. I had 3 good mentors in high school. When I was in college, I had a professional counselor, and he did great mirroring where he just reversed it back.
Right.
So I'd ask him, like, I don't understand, like, why is my friend mad at me? He goes, well, why do you think they're mad at you? And then I would answer him and go, oh. So I literally, that was every session.
Well, I had that in a seminary situation. I had taken an inventory that indicated the level of stress I had.
Oh, yeah.
And I had, life was happening. My grandmother had died. My wife and I had just bought a house. I was in my second degree in seminary. There's just a lot of things that were going on. So the stress level was high. And I went to my mentor, professor I graded for. He was my guy. And I went to him and I told him, I said, I scored real high on this inventory. I'm wondering what I do, what's next. And he looked at me and he goes, what do you think you ought to do? And I thought, okay, all right, physician, heal thyself, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I need a support system. I think I have a good support system. I've got a good cohort, about 9 other, doctoral students that were good friends and people I could talk to. And, that was my first thing, to have a support group. But then, and I was a facilitator in a group, and in a men's group. And one of the things that you're required to do as a facilitator is be a participant. It wasn't just you, being guiding and directing. Part of what you had to do was share your story. And so, I had a group that of 8 to 12 men that, I got to share about, which what that did for me was it opened up an understanding of transparency.
Oh.
And so being transparent in my life, and you can ask my students. I mean,
Sure.
I used to tell stories
You did.
all the time, all the time. And the reason is because I was maintaining a level of transparency about my life that, I didn't have to lie about anything. And I didn't tell all my
Right. You're not telling all the secrets.
personal,
Right. Yes.
well, I don't even call them secrets. This is information that nobody else needs to know.
Right. Doesn't matter to them.
But because I realized that, even in a group, I'm not necessarily in an intensive therapy
Sure.
situation, but I share, in that situation, I was the facilitator. They want to look at the facilitator, these guys in the group, they want to look at the facilitator and realize that he's not as issue laden as they are. And that's just an easy way of saying, well, I don't want to talk to somebody that's crazy as me, and I was the same way in therapy with people. Had a little vulnerability. I had to show that vulnerability to get the person to be vulnerable. Understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because if they didn't tell me what was going on, I didn't know what was going on. So, in your counseling sessions or in your personal experience, what was the initial session like? What would happen?
Different in different ones. I say probably up front, they discuss, they go through all their legal stuff, everything's kept in confidence and here's the responsibilities on my part. Here's what I expect from you to show up to sessions on time, blah, blah, blah. They talk about their fees. They talk about, typically they say that they want a certain level of commitment as far as how long, a minimum of at least 3 months, or 6 weeks or whatever. They might also talk about their credentials. They might talk about their education. They might talk about what techniques they use. So that's usually part of, again, some other places might actually have an assessment tool that they give where they run you through to sort of do what's called a psychosocial assessment.
First time that you went, what's going on in your thinking, in your thought process? And you said, I need to go.
I think that was the thing that for me, as I've gotten older, I've gotten better with my own self-awareness to be able to recognize, oh, I don't feel right. I need to probably address this, right? When I was younger, my self-awareness was much lower, and it took multiple people saying, I think you're having problems and you should find some help with this. And after a few people told me, it was, okay, maybe I listen to that.
Right.
And I'm very, now I'm really grateful that there were people in my life who said that, as opposed to, and that guy's weird, talk to me anymore, and because I didn't know. And I think at the time I was kind of, maybe the first couple of people said like, what do you know? But now in hindsight, I'm glad that someone said something. I think it's like when you have a spot on your back and you can't tell and it doesn't really itch you that bad. And someone's like, oh no, you need to get that looked at, you get that looked at. So that was probably back then. I would say more and more recently, especially as I became aware of things in mental health, I knew I'm not sleeping right.
Right.
I wake up in the middle of the night every single night. It is not a biological reason. I'm waking up feeling panicked in the morning immediately, like before coffee. We're talking, I wake up and I feel like my heart is racing.
Right.
I'm losing focus. I can't concentrate on things like I want to.
Right.
I'm obsessing about certain thoughts. I did notice all my curtains were closed 24/7 and was living in a dungeon.
Right.
They
get all the light.
Yeah. My diet was off. My energy was low. Um, excessive crying.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking like from an emotional trigger, like when the sad music comes on in a movie. You're supposed to cry when that happens. That's why they make the music so sad.
Right.
We're talking, I would be driving my car and I would just spontaneously start crying for no reason. Things like that.
Right.
Those are all, you know, or if you also realize maybe you're reaching for things to comfort you. Comfort foods.
Right.
Way too many comfort foods.
Right.
Not enough healthy foods. So I think that's, you inventory yourself.
Well, and I think that's what our listeners are probably thinking.
Yeah.
You know, I do that, or that happens to me.
Or
oh my
that's
gosh,
so and so.
I'm doing
Yeah.
what he did. You know,
Yeah.
and it's not that.
Yeah.
It's,
Where's
know,
the line, right?
yeah.
Where's the line?
Right. It's not that, you know, you're going crazy or anything like that. Counseling is not intended to deal with just,
Right.
you know, crazy and insane. It's not going to end up being, you know, 2 years of therapy or, you know, whatever, or even a lifetime of therapy. But it is, it's talking with someone that has knowledge and does know, the direction, you know, does know what's happening to you. You know, in the last episode, we talked about the PLISSIT model, you know, the permission or limited information.
Right.
I mean, that's what you're looking at. And if it's going to be short-term therapy, and, you know, like you said, in the initial session, I used to just hand them a paper. I would say, you know, read over this and sign it, you know, because that tells me that you have read and understand what happens in a counseling session. And nowadays, you get that in a text message. Go to see a doctor or whatever.
Yeah.
So, so you know all those things, because in my estimation, talking about that stuff in the first session, and up my time. You know, if I'm a client, I want to use that time to deal with my issue. I could care less, you know, about. I've already made the determination I'm going to pay the fee, you know, because I found that out already. And you know, I see you've got a master's degree or more, so okay, you know.
And I say usually, some places will do the first session will be longer. It'll be like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And they will account for that
Right.
that initial
Right.
getting all that stuff taken care of up
Yeah.
front. But there's usually also, I think, and again, my experience has been different with different people at different stages of life. I think that one of the things that I would probably say to a person is, if you think it's going to be a quick fix, just be open to maybe it's not.
Right.
Right. If you're aware of, people are like icebergs. If you're aware of the top layer, there's probably a lot more underneath, like
Right.
you were saying with those roots, right?
Right.
You are recognizing that your blooms are changing color, but it might be that there's something deeper at the root that needs to be resolved. And
Right.
so, you know, go into it with an open mind. Go into it with a, let's see what this is. And but initially just focusing on, like you said, those, here's my problem.
What if your expectations aren't met? I mean, you go into a counseling session, first session, you think it's not a good feel.
Listen, I've gone around and around on that before. I mean, first off, how do you know if you haven't been long enough? I think a lot of people would feel like it's a good fit if they felt like two things: one, they're being heard, and number two, that they're getting some kind of a result. Okay, I'm leaving here with some kind of understanding of, there is a fix, there is something to do, there is some, like, but just walking out going, I don't know that I learned anything. I don't know that I gained any insight. It doesn't sound like this person understood me at all. you know, so I would hate to tell someone to be like, yes, hang in there forever if it was a very bad counselor,
right.
truly. But I also know that oftentimes people want a very quick fix day one.
Right.
Tell me what's wrong. Tell me what to do. I want to get out of here. And sometimes it can take 2 or 3 sessions to get a good handle on what is the problem in the first place.
I've got a story.
I love it.
No, I had an experience one time with a teenager, teenage girl.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am, a grown man, and I wasn't as old then. I am now, but she came in, arms crossed, sitting in the chair across from me, and wasn't going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we learned in school was, you don't have to keep asking the question. You can sit in silence with a client, their time, and they either tell you what's going on or they sit in silence. And so I didn't even tell her that I was, in the game, of not saying anything. But the deal is who's going to talk first, and 17 minutes is an eternity.
In absolute silence? Yes,
in absolute silence. And finally she looked at me. I mean, of course she was sitting there looking at me anyway. And she goes, aren't you going to ask me questions? And I go, do you want me to ask you questions? And it was that first 17 minutes was just horrifying. But then when she asked the question, she broke the ice. So, in my mind, I go, I win. In my, and what it did is it allowed me to be able to open the door.
Right.
And I got my foot in the door. And when that happened, by the time we got to the end of the session, about 3 minutes before the end of the hour, I looked at her and I go, gone. And she goes, but I'm not done. And I said, then we'll schedule a session. Oh, yeah. When can we do that? I mean, she was anxious then at that point. I mean, if I'd said tomorrow at the same time, she probably would have come back. But I said, next week, I want you to take the week and think about the things we talked about. And, she came in next week and, man, from zero, she was ready to go. She was ready to tell me what was going on, what was happening, and what she was thinking, and she was looking for that limited information, and it was very short term. I mean, it only ended up being like 3 or 4 sessions. That gets taken care of very quickly. But as opposed to ones where it took me 2 sessions to determine what had happened. And when I revealed, how do you reveal? When I said to the client, how old were you when molestation from your mother started? She about fell out of her chair, because she looked at me and she goes, how do you know that? Well, I spent 2 sessions asking questions. Yeah. I mean, asking questions and I was doing process of elimination, and it came down to that was the only plausible, explanation. And the end result was, it was a couple of years of therapy there. Right. But just to let you know, that client is doing very, very
fantastic.
So,
but it goes back to kind of what we're, that's sort of what you said goes back what I said too. Be open, like go in, not with the expectation it's going to get fixed today, and not with the expectation it's going to be grueling and unbearable, and because that girl probably came in closed off, just I don't want to be here. Nothing's going to help me.
Right.
This guy doesn't know anything about my situation.
He's a guy.
Yeah.
I'm a girl. What does he know?
Right. And so, but if you can go in open, like if she had gone in open right off the bat Imagine that first session and how much better she wouldn't have ended with, I got more to say. She would have been like, wow, I said quite a lot. I feel good. It really changes the environment.
So, in that situation, you have a teenage girl talking to a middle-aged man.
Right.
What does a middle-aged man know about teenage girl?
Depends on his training.
I mean, that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
But, that's a challenge for the therapist, to overcome. So that's part of the expectation.
Sure.
You go in and you go,
what does she know about being a middle-aged man?
Yeah. Right. I mean, but it's not about me.
No. But everyone's
got
a different experience, right?
Right. But it's what can a middle-aged man tell me about being a teenage girl?
Right.
And once again, like you said, you have some idea of developmental psychology. You have knowledge of, what gets people into the issues that they face, and so it's there's once again part of the idea is that the therapist is educated to the point that it doesn't matter what ethnicity they are. It doesn't matter what gender they are. It doesn't matter age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's gender. I mean, all that doesn't matter. What you're doing is you're coming to somebody with the expectation they're going to help. Okay, so what do you got to put into it? What I mean, as a client, as somebody that's getting help, what do you got to put into it?
Honesty.
I mean, we talked about vulnerability before, and a therapist is going to ask pointed questions. I mean, he's going to ask or she's going to ask specific questions about certain things. A lot of times, in my therapeutic experience, I've asked very personal questions.
Yes,
and I know that the individual has looked at me like, what does that have to do with
anything?
And I've had to make the explanation, and I try not to take up that kind of time in a counseling session because minutes are minutes, and they want their money's worth.
I found it for me being both client and on both sides of the desk, so to speak. I feel that initially honesty more than vulnerability. Vulnerability is where you're going to get your change.
Right.
But I think if you can show up and just say, I don't want to be vulnerable, just be honest about that.
It's hard for me to be vulnerable.
Yes.
I mean, because if somebody comes in and says, I don't want to be vulnerable, you got to look at them and say, I know what your problem is.
Right.
Trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
But when you are being honest, as opposed to just not participating, when you sit there just blank face staring at your counselor and therapist, completely shut down and close off and not saying anything at all, then it really impedes everything. And I think if you can be honest enough and brave enough to be vulnerable enough to say, I struggle with vulnerability, that's fine. Or I don't want to talk about that issue. I'm afraid I'm going to end up in a hospital, or just anything at all. Then your trained therapist and counselor can reciprocate with that honesty.
Right. Well, in our pre-podcast discussion, talked about investment.
Yes.
That if you're going to see a counselor, you have to invest yourself.
Yes.
And so part of it is the energy.
Yeah. What are the investments would you say that a person should expect?
Well, I'm thinking that first off, the honesty. Second, that's where I'm talking about vulnerability. That therapist is going to ask me a pointed question. Going to ask me an intimate question. I need to be able to answer that question. I need to be able to, explain what I think, how I feel, because there's a reason that question's being asked. At least from my personal experience, therapist, every question I asked had a reasoning behind it.
Right.
Because in my mind, before I go into a session, if it's the initial session, I've got a format that I follow in my mind. But if it's the 10th session, I've got a plan that I'm working, as a therapist. Now, do I reveal all that plan to the client? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if I ask a intimate question or a personal question, then I need to have that answer, because that tells me more information that I need to know, be able to guide the person to have an understanding. I mean, just get down and dirty here for a second. Sounds bad. But, I had a client that was being sexually molested by her father. And her issue was that she physically enjoyed it. Well, there's a cognitive dissonance. Something horrible that's happening to her, but at the same time, physical reaction, she couldn't help. She couldn't stop. And when I explained to her, you had no control over the physical reaction. I mean, get into the physiology of the body and the mind and how things are going. In your mind, you're thinking, this, this is a horrible experience. It should never happen to anybody. And at the same time, there was a experience of intense feeling that was somewhat pleasurable. And how do you fix that? How do you get past that? And well, when we got to that point, that was her changing point. That's where when I explained to her, you have no control over the physical response. And you have no control over the physical. And it changed how she thought about it. And, it changed what was happening, because she kept thinking she was horrible and terrible, and, that she was nasty for thinking that way. And she was, all these horrible different adjectives that she was using about herself. And when she realized that she wasn't all those things, that she had no control, life changed for her. Now, she still had to deal with the fact that her father was, sexually molested her. He was dead, and things she could do about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of facets that come into play with that sort of a case. And
there were other issues that she had to deal with. But that's the kind of vulnerability that I'm talking about. And in that vulnerability, she reveals a truth about herself.
Right.
That gave me the understanding of, okay, this is something that we deal with. This is something that we can work on. This is something that we can change in the way that she thought about it. And consequently, started doing better after that session.
So initially we've mentioned that there's the, in the first session, they'll usually talk about fees. There's an investment there.
Right.
And then there's also the investment of the vulnerability and the honesty.
That was a personal investment.
Yes, the personal, yes. Right. And what you bring to the table, right? The energy you're putting into that relationship.
Time.
Yes.
You're investing your time.
Okay.
Because it's taking, an hour a week.
It is, yeah.
And if you live a busy life, an hour a week is a lot. The other part.
Well, you said work and effort, right? So.
Well, the effort part of it is that you're doing the necessary work outside of the session.
So what would that look like, do you think, for clients?
Oh, that can be anything from journaling, as you writing down your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, and you're organizing them. I mean, that's why we have people journal and keeps your focus on what's happening. It might be reading a book. There were a lot of books that I would refer people to, but I would say, I want you to just read chapter 10. That way they weren't hand them a book of 300 pages. And they would look at you and they go, I'm not reading this book, and you just say, I don't want you to read it. I just want you to read chapter 10. And then there were, I used the Bible as well. I just want you to read this passage, or I want you to read these passages, and I want you to journal about these. I would give homework basically for people to do, because when you're doing the homework, you're putting in the effort, and to change the belief system. We talked about that in the previous podcast. That there's a belief system down in the roots that needs to be changed. I believe that I can trust people. My wife has a hard time trusting, and I don't. But I'm a therapist. I do have observations, but and I have to I have to say to her, just trust the system. Trust that this is going to work. Trust that this is going to happen. Trust that these people are doing the job for you. Trust, and it's just hard for her to do. And there are people out there because they don't want to make them. I don't want you to. I don't want you to. But that's putting the effort in. Make the difference. So journaling and reading scripture, writing about your thoughts about that scripture, exercise, physical exercise, so meditation. I don't just say the meditation where you kind of stuff, but the meditation where close off the rest of the world. And you may have music in the in the background, and I'm not talking about Led Zeppelin. I'm talking about just instrumental, kind of music.
There's also lots of other things that were culturally part of our the way people lived. Needlework, right? Where you're just intensely focused on an activity, ignoring other thoughts and things going on and you're just.
That's a challenge, man.
It is
intensely focused. That's and that's what you're trying to do with all these other homework assignment kind of things, is that you're trying to get as a therapist, you're trying to get people to focus on something other than their issue, because they will ruminate the hooey out of their issue. And they just have that cyclical thinking, and they overthink it, and they end up, in a situation where they're overwhelmed, and they're exhausted from thinking about it. And by the time they get to you in a counseling session, the exhaustion is, I just don't want to talk about this anymore, and so the homework helps you to stay focused on what it is that you talked about in the session. I used a program for sexual addicts. It's a 12-step program, and I would have them work it once a week. Each step that they would, and when they would come back the next week, we would have the discussion about what that step was about and what the difficulties were. And if they come back and they go, well, and I go, look, if you're not going to do this, then you're not ready for counseling. I'm not going to say you don't need counseling. You're not ready for counseling until you're ready to make the difference. And because the first step was overcoming the denial.
But that's, that's a big thing too. I think that sometimes people don't always realize. Even I know we talked at the beginning of this, like, how did I know to go to sessions? And it was people were telling me to, right? It took multiple people, sometimes long periods of time of hearing it before I finally went. And so there's these 5 stages for change, right? And there's pre-contemplation. And that's oftentimes when someone's in a problem and in denial, like you said, it's that maybe that person who has a drinking problem and doesn't want to admit it's a problem, or that person who's in a bad relationship and no, everything's fine, we're good, and that denial is preventing them from seeing they need help.
Contemplation
Yep, that's stage
explain
2.
that. Explain.
Well, pre-contemplation's the problem. Contemplation's where you start to realize I got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's where you start. Now,
so the pre is not.
Pre is like you're not.
Yeah, you're looking at it.
You're
going,
talking.
I'm okay.
Listen, we're not talking
it's
step
not
1.
That big a deal.
Right, we're not counting from 1. We're counting from 0. Right. That is, I'm in a problem, but I'm not even aware of it.
So contemplation or pre-contemplation is just your thought process about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
but
so
not
what's
even.
the next. What's the next step?
So the next step is contemplation. That's where you're thinking, oh, maybe my relationship is bad. Maybe I do have a problem with drinking. Like, I'm not going to change it.
Or I am looking at too much pornography on my phone, or
right. Or I'm distracted too much, and I can't focus all the time. Like, okay, but I can handle it.
Right.
I don't need help. Everything's it'll go away on its own. Give it more time, and my spouse will get it together. Right. There's those excuses maybe going on, still slightly denial, but you're not necessarily coming up with a plan of attack, but you are at least recognizing the problem.
Right.
The third phase would be like preparation, where you're preparatory, where you're making plans for what you're going to do to actually fix the problem. Now you're saying, I need AA. I need to get into a program. I need help.
So you would be in the you would go to the counselor.
That's deciding. That's making the decision to get help, to go get a counselor.
That's the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
So this third one is kind of a danger zone. I mean, because
now you're deciding what to do.
Because you can end up back at pre-contemplation,
or trading one problem for another.
Well, I mean, you look at it and you go, well, okay, I need to go see a counselor. No, and you go back to the pre-contemplation. No, I can handle this on my own.
Mm-hmm. I'll leave this relationship to go find another one.
Yeah.
And it's the same problem, right? Because again, you didn't do the healthy steps to get to the right place. And so what you did was you traded one addiction for another, one issue for another, one toxin for another. And so the fourth stage, that's the taking action, getting involved and doing something productive, healthy, about the issue. And that's where hopefully people are going to start making changes. And that's where we're talking about investment and putting in the effort and vulnerability.
So the fourth stage is going to a counselor. Okay.
Yes. That would be going to a counselor. That would be going to a doctor, checking into a rehab, like really getting
help.
Taking ownership of the problem in a healthy, productive manner. And then the last phase is just maintaining once you've actually made the change and you've actually applied the effort and you've gotten the results that you wanted, maintaining and not falling back into the trap that you first fell into in the first place.
Well, those are triggers.
Yes.
That's the thing that you
learn.
You
hopefully learn.
You learn those triggers, the things that would set you off to the point where you would do the behavior that, would start you all over again.
Right.
And so basically it's just teaching and training yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what counseling does, is it gives you the tools to use,
educating yourself.
Right. And then the maintenance is, where you would end up, instead of going to a counselor on a weekly basis, it might be on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. Mm-hmm. It's just a kind of a checkup. Am I still doing the things that I need to do to maintain healthiness?
Right. And I was talking about, mention alcoholism in AA. It's a program, but it sparked something in me. It got me thinking about identity. In AA, there's this, I am an alcoholic,
mm-hmm.
right? That is part of those steps towards recovery. And it got me thinking about diagnosis, another issue that comes up, I think, when people are getting help and they're in that process. How important do you feel like it is to have a diagnosis? Like what could you tell our listeners about diagnosis?
Two things about that, or two mm-hmm. ways to go. One, as a therapist, you need to know what the diagnosis is. You need to know what the issue is beyond the issue. And that's where we have a diagnostic statistic manual
Right.
It's called the DSM-5R or something now.
Yeah.
It just keeps going. But it's like the 5th edition revised. And so there are a number of psychological, emotional, personality disorders that are laid out in that. And each one of those disorders have a criteria or a number of criteria to determine whether or not this is actually
that
a problem.
Issue. Right.
Right. And it's assigned a number for insurance purposes. But the idea is that, you go through that. If a diagnosis does take place, then it gives you a list of things that you can do,
approaches to take.
Right. And this would be
it's like if you had a car breakdown, you're like, oh, it's making this sound, right? And your mechanic is like, that's this. Yeah. I know all I got to do is replace the part or apply this fluid or pressure or whatever, and it will fix the problem.
Right.
So, but
that's what people are looking for. So the other side of it is that the individual wants to know what's my diagnosis.
Is that beneficial for them to know?
That's kind of a gray area, because sometimes people go, what's my diagnosis? And they carry it around like a badge,
identify to it.
Hey, I've been to a psychiatrist and this is what they, this is what they've said I am, I am insane. So
like the alcoholic who identifies, I am the alcoholic, right? And then they never let go of that identity. But then there's also the flip side, I think, where recognizing you're an alcoholic appropriately to say, okay, I have this condition. I now know I need to safeguard myself against it, right? So if I knew that I was depressed, then maybe I would know how to respond to it.
Well, and that's that's the idea of sharing that diagnosis with the client, to say you've got anxiety. And when you say you have anxiety, well, everybody has anxiety, but there's a difference between panic attack and anxiety attack, and to help them to understand that difference, a lot of times helps them to know what it is I need to do. And because as a therapist, you're looking at it and you're going, here's something that you can use when this happens. And panic attack is short term, it comes and goes quickly. An anxiety attack can go on for days. And that's a challenge that people have. Now, what do I do when I have an anxiety attack? How do I stop the anxiety? What I do when I have a panic attack, and there are tools you can use. Anxiety attack a lot of times goes a little bit further, where you might need a medication, and it can be as needed. It doesn't necessarily have to be a daily dose. Most doctors usually do the daily dose because people are experiencing anxiety all the time. So it's it's a challenge for the individual, but what happens with it is that they know what's happening. And what I used to do with clients is that, let me describe the panic attack. And I would describe to them what's happening. They would look at me and they would say, yes, that's exactly what's happening.
So rather than give them the diagnosis, talk to them about their symptoms.
Right. And I would say, oh, when this happens, here's a good method to help you focus. And I've seen a couple of things. I mean, I watch TikTok videos just like everybody else, but I've seen a couple of things recently. One guy, wasn't talking about anxiety. He was talking about ADHD. And he said, to splash cold water on your face.
Right.
And the reason that you do that is because it changes in your brain. It changes what's going on inside your brain to keep it from ruminating about, whatever the problem or whatever's going on, to, man, that was cold.
Yeah.
I need to do that again.
Right.
And,
and interrupts that cycle.
It interrupts the cycle. Yeah. And that's when I'm talking about tools, for a panic attack, that's what I would do. Is I would interrupt the cycle. I would teach people this is where you need to you need to find a place to sit. You need to find a place where you're alone, and you are secure.
Right.
Because part of the panic is that I'm not in this place. Right. And I had people have a panic attack in the checkout line at the grocery with a cart full of groceries, and they just walk away. That's tough, you know, because people go, the people at the grocery store are going, what's going on with them? Hey lady, or hey buddy, you can't,
you forgot your stuff.
Yeah,
what are you doing?
But part of the thing of it is that, it can be environmental. Walking down these wide aisles and everything's okay, but then at the end of the process, you come into this little narrow chute that they have all these items that are on both sides. You're overwhelmed, and all of a sudden you're in a panic attack. So anyway, the point is that to know the difference. Okay, I'm depressed. Well, to ask yourself the question, why? What's my depression? What's happening to me that's causing my depression? Is it something that's environmental? Is it something, my friend died, my dog died,
I got laid off.
Lost my job, and those are normal reasons to be depressed.
Right.
And there are people out there that go, don't be depressed about that. There's another job, you can find another friend, and you can go buy another pet,
Right.
That's not necessarily the best approach to things, but to understanding the difference between being depressed because there's a situation that's happened and being depressed just because.
Do you think if a client were in sessions going somewhere that they should they expect to know their diagnosis or just trust that, well, if I need to know, that my counselor therapist will tell me?
I believe that, well, this is just my personal guess about myself. If I'm in a situation and I'm in a counseling situation, I need to know what my diagnosis is. Because when you know a diagnosis, there's another term that goes with that, that's prognosis. Is this something that I'm going to get out of? Because to be diagnosed as depressed, it's got to be over a period of time. That's part of the criteria I was talking about with the diagnostic manual. So it's got to be over a period of time. It's not just been depressed for a week.
Yeah. When I think about, if I felt an extraordinary amount of pain in my leg and I went to the hospital, call it what you want. I don't care if it's in Latin or Icelandic. I don't care. Tell me maybe what happened, what caused it, what I can do about it. I that's just my thinking. And I think you're right. You run into the trap of people identifying too much with their diagnosis, but I think that it is the wanting to know what went wrong, what's the prognosis. I think people are more interested in the prognosis
over
the diagnosis.
Yeah.
What am I going to do about it?
And how long is this going to last?
And what does this mean for me? Yeah. How long can I expect to suffer? Yeah.
I had some clients that, they were experiencing the anxiety and they were on medications and heavy medications to deal with the anxiety, to the point that they, shuffled their feet. It was so strong, medications. And they wanted to know how long that was going to last. Well, that was 30 years ago. And, I still know these people and they no longer deal with the anxiety that they did 30 years ago. And for some people that it comes and then it goes. For some people it comes and it stays. And for those people to know their diagnosis so that they know what to do about it when it does come up, helps them to be back or whatever that phase, that's going on. Because we've broken it down, I say researchers have broken it down now to where they know which which neurotransmitter is creating the problem. And they can put you on the medication that can help that neurotransmitter operate the way that it's supposed to operate. And the medication can help tremendously.
Right.
But there are a lot of people that go, I don't want to take a pill for everything. I
think I've also found that a lot of people sometimes don't want to get involved with things that they might feel embarrassment around, like certain techniques that are just, I'm not doing on a shape. I'm not going to go do that stuff. It's like, and I can relate to that and understand that. I think therapy counseling should be fun. I think there should be a certain degree of discovery, and I don't know if this means that it's all pleasurable and that it's enjoyable, sometimes bringing up painful memories and experiences. But I do think that there should be some level of, at some point,
and
there should be a, wow, I didn't know that about myself.
And I agree with that. But see, from the therapeutic or from the therapist's point of view, you need to be aware that the client may not like you.
Yes.
And so therapy is not going to be fun.
It's not always going to be comfortable.
Right. And because the therapist is there to tell you the truth, not to paint some, rosy picture that says, everything going to be all right. I mean, it's not always that way,
When I was at a counseling at a school, I had a teacher ask me, said, what do you feel like your role is as a, working with the kids and stuff? I said, well, if I had to sum it up, I feel like my role is to have honest conversations about the reality of their life. And I was like, short, sweet, simple. My role is not to fix their problems. My role is not to make them walk out feeling a certain way.
Right.
It's just to have honest conversations about the reality of their life. And then from that, hopefully to help generate change in a positive way. But
personal experience in therapy with people, I had to break them down to raw emotion because they had so many, walls built up around their emotion. I would describe it as a castle wall, usually 6 feet thick and nothing could penetrate it. And that because they kept it guarded, and I had to figure out how to tear those walls down so that I could get them to the raw emotion. So then I could help them to know how to deal with that raw emotion. I had couples fighting in my office often because I needed to see how they fight. I needed to see if they fought fair. I don't fight fair, but I had to teach them how to fight fair. And how to make your point without being hurtful or hateful to the other person. And we are in that today. Golly, people will make a comment and the hate will spew from all over the place. And I think we have that because of Facebook. 30 years ago, we didn't have Facebook.
Several social media platforms. I'd say
and so you had to deal with things face to face.
Yeah.
And so now you can make a remark or make a statement.
Oh yeah. Well, even people who have nothing but ill intent against the world had to learn how to pretend to get along with people. Right. And now they don't have to pretend online.
Now you have people that just poke the bear.
Oh,
and just to
for
get
fun.
A response.
Yeah.
So, all right. So how do you know when to terminate?
So how do you go from that action phase to maintenance phase, right? How do you know it's time to walk away?
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Well, from a therapist viewpoint, I look at it and I look at the goals that we had for therapy.
Yes.
And I share with the client, we had these goals. These are the things that we wanted to deal with, but this led to new goals. And that's what happens a lot of times. But I look at it and I I don't say, well, there's nothing else I can do, so you're on your own.
Right.
Um, but I've had sessions where I've had to terminate therapy because the people broke the rules.
Yes.
You know,
right.
They came to my home. That's a no-no.
Right.
Don't come to my home. I've got a specific place that I do therapy, and you don't come to my home. This individual came to my home. Essentially what happened was we moved. I had to change my phone number, my home phone number. There were a lot of things that took place because of that event. She showed up at my house, and my wife called me and said, from a neighbor's house, and said, so-and-so's at my house. And I came to my house, and you need to be in my clock. And she, well, I have. And I said, whatever you have, you need to cancel. And I gave her 3 referrals and told her that, she broke the rules, and there's nothing I can do to help her now, because she has this idea, this concept, she can do what do without consequence. And so,
yeah,
but that was something different. When we're talking about termination, you've met all the goals, you've met, you've achieved an understanding what you're supposed to do, and you have a level of self-maintenance to handle.
And I think that's the key point, that the client, the person who's there for treatment, is able to do for themselves, and that they are at a place of stability, right? They're balanced. Everything's not that their life is perfect, but it's that they now have the ability to contend with the difficulties and challenges of life. I think that there's usually 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 ways that this goes. One is that you start having conversations about it, and that you start working into what's called a maintenance phase, where you just spread out those sessions until eventually you get to a point where it's like, why are we still,
right?
Sometimes clients are, I think I need to stop or move on, and okay, well,
I have another story.
I may think differently, but then also I think counselors have a responsibility, I think, of recognizing that to continue would convince the person their problems more than addressing the actual factual problem.
I have a story.
Okay.
Or I have an instance.
Great.
I had a couple that came to me on Friday, and it was what I call the Star Wars therapy session. You're our only hope, kind of thing, and it was on Friday.
Yep.
And I had total honesty with this couple in that session. And I thought, well, I'll never see them again, and then on Monday morning, I get a call. We'd like to see you this afternoon. Absolutely. 3:30. I've got an opening. Come see me. And they showed up, and it was total change, total opposite, in a matter of 48 hours.
Right.
This was
right.
Totally different. And it wasn't what I did, because in my responsibility, or, in my part, I kind of reamed them a new hole. I mean, I just reamed them out real good, both of them, in their responsibility in their marriage and that sort of thing. And in the process, at the end of the session, or left abruptly, but well, he did. But I prayed about it all weekend, and on Monday, Holy Spirit made a difference. That's all I can attribute it to. It wasn't me, because I didn't do any therapy. I just, told them how irresponsible they were, basically. And the Holy Spirit is working. When they came back on Monday, I looked at them and I said, I can help you learn how to communicate better. I said, but I can guide you to a book that'll be cheaper. And Uh, Now, I suggested to them, you've got a marital seminar that pops up at your church, go to it. If weekend that you could go do it. And, there wasn't anything else I could do, and left it to them. I said, we can do a checkup in 6 weeks and see where you're at and see what's going on. Um, but, uh, I had that in that situation. I had another situation where they came in, they were loaded for bear, both of them. And, I had the session with them, and second session when I came back, totally different. And this was an elderly couple, totally different with each. And I said, what happened? I asked them, what happened? Why is this different now? And he said, I got saved. So once again, the Holy Spirit's right in the middle of it. And so I recognized that the Holy Spirit's much greater counselor, therapist,
right,
doctor, whatever than I'll ever be. And and sometimes just healing their hearts, changes them what they do. And so when they came back, I looked at them, I said, we can set up an appointment 6 weeks from now, check up, but I don't think that's needed. So they didn't realize the termination point, but I did.
right.
And that's
yes.
I think that's important on the therapist part, is to know when you're done. And and I had one client where I said, I can't do I can't help you anymore. I believe that you need to see a female therapist.
Right.
And in the process of seeing it, and there was immediate, no, I don't talk to need to talk to a woman to break these barriers down, get better. Because it was just going to be the same thing over me, So she started seeing a woman, she got better. I mean, that sounds bad on my part, but it was, I helped her through a certain part of her therapeutic experience, but the healing part was going to come by having that experience with female counselor. So, and I'd said earlier, it doesn't matter gender, it doesn't matter initially.
Right. Right. Well, in the bigger sense, right. Yeah.
Because there's the realization that this is, this is something that, this is a barrier that you have to work on with someone of your same gender.
Well, it's also true
to break down.
If certain techniques that I haven't been to school for or had the training for me to say, this is outside my area of expertise, but I know someone who has that and could help in this way. Would you be open to go work with them instead? I think that would be better for you.
Well, I also had a client one time that I told her that I've done all I can do.
Yeah.
And
like talking at this point is just taking your money.
Well, I looked at her. I looked at the situation, and what it was she had a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Okay, and so part of the diagnosis of that is doctor hopping, and so I was like the third or fourth in line, and there's that idea in your mind that I'm going to fix her this time, I know what to do in this situation.
Well, they didn't know, and I do, yeah.
And she had more problems than borderline personality. She had Munchausen by proxy, but she was sick. She had Munchausen, making herself sick. She had a port, and she was washing the port out with dirty water and gave her sepsis, making her sick. So it was, she went to a medical doctor. He determined that. And she came back to me and said, crazy. And we're done. She had some pretty serious stuff going on, and I had to refer her on as well. But you know, there are reasons that a therapist would do the termination, but as a client, what you do is you realize that you have reached all the goals that you've had for the therapy.
You can maintain the change. Yeah.
And if you need something else, you can say, 8 months from now, I'd like to set up
right. Yeah.
And you go with it.
Yeah.
You say, okay. In 8 months, I'm going to ask these questions.
Yeah.
And that becomes part of your notes that you take. Anyway. All right. So when to go to counseling? We hope that you understand a little bit more about the choice to go see a counselor. I believe that the challenges that you face when you go to see a counselor are not as bad as what you think might happen. I believe that understanding that you have to invest part of yourself in the process, and I believe that understanding your diagnosis can help you know what route you need to take, to get better. And then finally, to know when you don't need counseling. Always have that friend or always have that person that has that willingness to say to you, you need to go talk to somebody. Because that friend is not putting you off. That friend is giving you the guidance that they know they can't give you, that a counselor could. So thank you for listening today. I'm Dr. Keith Roach.
I'm Sean Van.
And we'll see you next time on Sykes Peak.